order to love myself, I had to really critique myself and look at myself and through that critical lens as well, and try to improve myself as I pick myself apart. Like I'm my toughest critic.
Welcome to the SGV Master Key, a show where you will hear personal stories of triumph over failures and how others successfully navigated the unique landscape that is the San Gabriel Valley. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we have chosen the San Gabriel Valley for our home or businesses or both. We believe it is the people and small businesses that make this community great, and we love to share their stories with you. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at sgvmasterkey.com. Here are the hosts for the show, Russell Mono and Scott Warmoth.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the SGV Master Key. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending this time with us. And we always appreciate the guests, the comments that people have about the show. And, you can always find that information on our website, on YouTube. But feel free to always drop us a comment and let us know how we're doing. Scott, today, I'm all smiles. I've been telling you, I'm really excited. This is probably the most excited I've been for any guest to be on the show.
Yeah, definitely. You have been talking about it. He's been really anticipating, this conversation.
Yeah. And, it's fun just to be in the presence of people and people you care about. But we were talking about friendships and lasting friendships and how there are just some people in your life that maybe you don't see each other for 5 years, 10 years, maybe in your case, more than that. And when you reconnect with them, it's just like time has stood still in a sense.
Well, I had that very experience a couple of years ago. In high school, I was very close, one of my very best friends. And after high school, we went to live in New York together. We roomed together, spent a lot of time together. But then we went 30 years without really interacting much. I mean, we would see each other here or there, still very, close friends, but we just didn't connect. We were each, living our own lives in different cities and just didn't have the opportunity. But about 3 years ago, we finally took a little trip together, 3 or 4 days. And the conversation picked up right where it left off in Manhattan, 35 years ago. I mean, we just picked up with the same topic and, just the same way of interacting and connecting. This is a very close, meaningful relationship. And I know that's what you're feeling today because
Sure.
you've got someone you probably see more often living locally, but yeah, you're all giddy about it today.
Yeah, and so when we have spoken, we talked about what connects, what unifies, you with someone as a friend, and it's not commonalities in terms of hobbies and interests. Those things change and they fade, and what we had discussed at some point in our friendship was values. That the similar values that we hold are really what unite us as friends and keep us friends. So, well, our guest today, I've known since second grade, and we have a lot of memories together, a lot of joy, funny times. He has impacted, I would say, the San Gabriel Valley in a very meaningful way. I don't know people who have come into his life and have left not being extremely positively impacted. And he is a person that I know that the people whose lives he touches are going to remember for the rest of their life. 100%.
And that's an incredible thing to say about someone.
Yes. So he is a teacher. He is a coach, and he is a father, and he's my good friend of many years. Danny Wu. Danny, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Danny.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm really, really humbled, and people actually want to listen to what I have to say. Wow, this.
Yeah, now you have to be meaningful.
No.
Well, actually, what you do is you guide young people in all of those roles that you mentioned: teacher, coach, parent. You influence and guide people, young people. And that's a very important thing to be able to do successfully.
Sure. So, Danny, this show is the SGV Master Key. So, why don't you share with the audience, what is your connection to the San Gabriel Valley?
Wow, that's well, first of all, like, I've known Russell for a long time, and I'm pretty giddy about it too, because we're actually going to talk about a lot of things I have to talk about. Russell has been a seminal part of who I am, and he doesn't even know it. And in a lot of ways, like, I didn't even know it until you have time, that separation, that, even listening to you two talk in the preamble of this whole thing, like, it got me really emotional. And I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to cry before this thing even starts? Because I started like realizing other things that has happened in the past, and being able to reflect on things and seeing how that has affected and how it has informed like who I am today. So I'm really excited to just get started. But wow, the SGV, you know what? To tell you the truth, I never thought of the SGV as like an entity. And it wasn't until recently where it's like, oh wow, the San Gabriel Valley has its own little identity. I never really even thought of it that way. So to hear like my good friend do like an SGV podcast, because we needed to do that, so that question, like, I don't even know how to answer it until now, where we do have we're very unique here, and I can't put my finger on it, but the people are different because of our experiences here, and every little community has their own uniqueness and distinctions because of they have their own personalities, and I think that's the best way for me to describe that. Yeah,
I didn't grow up here. I moved here as an adult. The San Gabriel Valley does have a very, I would say, a distinct feel and almost culture. And I'm not talking about ethnic identity or anything like that, but just the setting. It's a valley, but, it has this series of, maybe 30, 40 cities. I'm not sure how many. But every one of them is just a little slice of, like, maybe not perfection, but just a little slice of something really homey and nice. And different from, say, West LA or San Fernando Valley. These are just more, I think, distinct, character-filled communities.
It's interesting you say that, because there were many points where I thought I would never live in Monterey Park. I would never want to come back to the San Gabriel Valley. And I keep finding myself coming back.
That you found it too boring or something like that?
I don't know. Maybe it's my rebellious nature in me. I have this innate, I need to leave type of nature. And then I always find myself wanting to come home.
So where is home for you? Or where did you grow up, Danny? I know where you did, but...
So home, that question is so interesting, because I was born in a little island off the coast of Borneo called Labuan. It's actually a port. Teeny tiny island. You can drive around it in less than 2 hours, the perimeter of it. And when I go back to Labuan, I was there for 4 years. I was born in Labuan. It's part of Malaysia. And when I left, it was 6 years later before I went home, and I felt so at home there. So Labuan is definitely home for me. I don't know why. It might be a spiritual connection, but I feel so comfortable there, even though it's hot and humid and gross. I love it. I love every second of my time there. At the same time, home to me is where my people are. And when I say my people, I'm not just talking about the ethnic people or from a racialized standpoint, but there's a certain way that San Gabriel Valley people act and behave, and I can't put my finger on it, because when I leave it, it's different. And when I'm home, people just understand each other a certain way. And sometimes people handle conflicts a certain way. People handle their celebrations a certain way. So home is that corner of, where Chang's house is?
Yeah.
Right across the street from Inez.
That's McFerrin and
what's that street? Man,
Is it Newmark? Is Burgermeyer Library on Newmark?
I think so.
It's that Newmark.
Yeah.
I don't, that's the weird thing, is I don't even know street names in my own, where I lived where I grew up for 20 years.
Yeah.
I just know where that is. And
Well, that's right by City Hall.
It
right?
is.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So if
Yeah.
I have to say home is that stretch from Russell's house at the end of McFerrin on Hellman, spanning towards down Hellman to Mark Keppel, and then walking home through Lincoln, going through, cutting through Garfield to Bruggemeyer Library,
Yeah.
Barnes Park, Kidfield, Inez School. That's home. Like I feel so alive when I'm there. It's the strangest thing. So that's my best answer for you when you ask me where home is.
You know, that's funny because when I moved to the San Gabriel Valley in 1984, that's where I lived, right in that neighborhood too.
Oh,
Yeah, right on.
that's why we're here together right now.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
it's
home. We're
fate.
home.
Yeah.
We're home.
So all of those things that you mentioned, Bruggemeyer Library, Kidfield, Barnes Park, those are, all just in my memories of childhood and growing up. And, we basically played basketball every morning, recess, lunch, and after school at Kidfield.
Kidfield is what, an elementary school or what?
It's across the street from Inez. I actually don't know if it's a part of the school or if it's separate.
You know what? I don't know either, but it functioned as our field, our playground. The older kids' playground. That's how it functioned as. It has the football field, soccer field. It had basketball courts, full courts, whereas on the actual school campus, there were only half courts and no grass area. So it's just across the street.
So what was it like growing up in Monterey Park then for you?
I would say the first word when you asked me that question is confusing. It was really confusing because it was like living in three different worlds. And there's my home that was very matriarchal, dominated by my grandmother. And then there was school, and then there was and then there's the rest of the world. And I had to feel like I had to adapt to each three environments and settings every time. And I had to be a different Danny every single set. For each setting, I had to be a different person.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say that's a bad thing or a good thing. It just was. But those three settings collide, and I wanted to tell this story. My grandfather was a prisoner of the Japanese army for 2 weeks during World War II. He was running a coffee shop in Labuan with his older brother. And this was around the time when the Japanese army invaded and occupied Malaysia. So from that experience, my grandpa, the army actually accused him and his older brother of giving information to the rebels, which they actually were. But that's another story to tell another time. And I like to think my grandpa was part of the resistance.
Star
Star Wars, yeah. Of course, there has to be a Star Wars reference. And so my grandfather had this deep-seated hate for Japanese people. Deep-seated hate. Because he was imprisoned and tortured by the army. And his brother actually was released a month later and died weeks later because of the trauma that occurred from there. But anyway, fast forward to second, third grade, the first time I bring Russell home. I'm like, Russell, come over and play. And my grandparents see Russell and they're like, Jipun kya? And I'm like, yeah, Jipun kya is a Japanese boy. And they were so mad and pissed. I don't know if you remember that day.
I don't.
But they were so upset. And in my mind, I'm like, dude, that's Russell. Whatever. And they were just so mad. They didn't say a word to me. They to their credit, they didn't kick Russell out. They didn't yell at him. They didn't.
Well, she yelled at me, but not for being Japanese.
Oh, yeah. It's just the way we spoke to each other. It's just how we communicated. My grandma yells, and that's just the way she talks. But they weren't mad at him. They were mad at me for bringing home this Japanese kid. And I remember that night having a big argument with my grandparents and my mom. And that having to stick up for Russell was kind of my first experience with having to deal with racialized issues. And I didn't know what that meant back then. I just remember like, no, you don't get to treat my friend this way. He wasn't even born in Japan. He was born and he had nothing to do with that. And that was really interesting. And, but I do have to say too, for my grandparents and my families, I would learn later that the rest of my family had this deep-seated hate for Japanese people. Don't buy Japanese cars. Don't buy Japanese products. Like, it was that deep-seated. And it took me a long time to realize like why it was so deep-seated, because people aren't taught the difference between like structures and systems and government power and people, right? We're just given propaganda. So in thinking about that, I give my family a lot of credit for evolving, because I married a Japanese girl while my grandmother was still alive, and my grandma loved her. My grandparents and my family came to easily accept Russell as like one of my best friends.
How did you, in your own mind, what did you think about their hatred of Japanese? Did you think it was justified, or did you understand it, or did you feel it was unfair? What was your thinking? How did you? Feel?
When I came to realizations, it's kind of conflated now, because there's that saying of like, the older you get, the better you were, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know when I came to these realizations. I just remember that as a kid, I felt it was unfair to Russell, but I also wanted to understand why my grandparents felt the way they did and why the rest of my family fed off that. I'm sorry, can you ask your
so
question?
I'm just thinking how deep-seated and complex this whole, identity issue is. And, your grandparents, your family did go through a horrible experience, and they came out thinking a certain way about, in this case, a certain nationality or race. But is that justified?
Yes.
Do you understand?
Right. I okay. So, that experience really led me down the path of really understanding how society functions and how systems function. And so when I think of these type of things, when you look at things like military conflict, it's always, I came to the understanding that the function of it is for a group of people to hang on to power and wealth. And when you think of it that way, those small groups of people, they have the ways to communicate. They have the control of the medium of communication. So the best way to control wealth and power is to make sure people hate each other. Mm. And because when you look at wars, when you look at any type of conflict, it's always some type of sixth grade, fifth grade drama between people with power, and the people who lose out or are harmed are people who want nothing to do with this, and the people who have to be exploited in order for these people to hold power. So understanding that, it made sense why my grandparents had to hate a certain group of people, because they were still living under a certain structure in order to survive, where they have no choice but to hate if they wanted to survive at that point, because they're, as part of their national identity. And that's where, like, in my understanding and in my work that I do today, like understanding the difference between nationalism and pride in your people are two different things. Even when I look at religion, like, and faith, there's a difference between faith and organized religion. Like, and always seeing things through the lens of power, the distribution of power, the sharing of power, and the balance of power. Mm-hmm. So when I see things that way, yes, the hate. I don't know if justified is the right word, but I understand why it existed.
A lot of Asian countries have produced a generation of people who strongly dislike or hate Japanese. And I didn't really understand that until I learned about a lot of the things that they did. And So from my perspective, I can completely understand why they would feel that way. I mean, they were meant to eradicate culture in order to really occupy the lands that they took over. So you don't actually own that land if people are still speaking their own language and eating their own food and dressing how they want. It's not your land. But if you can get rid of that, now it's your land. And that was the thing that really, really hurt a lot of people. China, Korea, Malaysia.
And at the same time, you have we were Chinese, and my family was really proud of being Chinese. And as I grew up and learned how the Chinese government has exploited people, it's like, whoa, like I'm proud to be Chinese, but I want nothing to do with the government or the nationalism part of it. So that's all. That's all.
Yeah,
part
it's
of
nationalism that's always the problem, I think,
Right.
as I look at it.
Well, let's return back to Inez and those days. So Danny and I, he lived literally around the block, maybe 2 block lengths away, and in those days, I remember, you could just tell your mom, I'm going somewhere, and you would leave and go. And so we would walk, I don't know that we walked to school, but we would walk from school. And I think that's how our friendship, sort of started. And then we both went to the same high school, right? So what was your experience, going from Inez to Mark Keppel?
So I at the time and even today consider Russell we're kindred spirits. We're connected in so many ways. And I remember, when you get to high school, everyone has to ask, who's your best friend? Who's your best friend? Who's your best friend? And my answer well, Russell's one of them. And people would say I never see you two together. You don't even talk at school. I'm like, well, do we have to? But that was interesting because when we got to high school, that's where we really saw that we started to gravitate towards other things. For me, it was really focused on basketball and whatever chances I get to hang out, because my mom was super strict. My mom was nice little Chinese lady, but at home, monster, right? in a good and bad way at the same time. But she was super strict, and I just remember that's part of the two worlds again. Having to. What's interesting about being in high school is that you have to fit in, and fitting in means not necessarily changing who you are, but you almost have to be present at certain things. Were you at Johan's house? Were you at Prano's? Were you at this? Were you at that? And just your physical presence had to be there. And the way my upbringing was, I had to be home by 4:00 and then 6:00. And it's you're in high school. People don't go home till 12. But and so then you had these ruptures within home where it's oh, I'm studying at so-and-so's place when I'm out doing something else. So that was foremost on my mind, on always navigating. How do I still be part of whatever's going on with my friends at school, the social life that I really wanted to be a part of, because there were some great people I wanted to be around, or thought I wanted to be around. And at home.
And it'd be nice to come back to this topic, but I'm just thinking, if you flash forward here, I don't know, 30 years, I don't know what the number is, but you're now teaching at that same school, is that right?
I'm coaching basketball there.
You're coaching there,
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what's it like going back to the place that has all this memory for you?
Wow, that's interesting, because I have a love-hate relationship with, and I think this is all rooted with this idea of being 3 different people all the time. Because you can see all the flaws and everything. I learned from seeing flaws, and so I have this when I love something, I'm gonna pick it apart. I'm gonna critique it because I want it to be better. So in that sense, I have this constant tension with Mark Keppel High School, because I wanted to be such this great place, this home place for everybody, that I pick it apart sometimes to a fault where I don't enjoy it. But at the same time, I love this place. I won't go anywhere else. Like when I left coaching for a few years, I was asked by, some people who I really respected to join different coaching staffs. And I just couldn't, because I didn't want to, I felt like I was turning my back on my people kind of thing. And I wanted to serve like my people who went through Mark Keppel. And I feel like because I went through Mark Keppel, not that I have this authority that I know what it's like, but it's almost as if like there's this like unseen connection with everyone who passes through that place.
Has high school changed? Do you see the kids today going through the same things you went through?
That's an interesting question that I get all the time. I actually don't think kids are any different today than they were when we were growing up. I actually don't see it. What's changed is how people try to manage or work with kids. The environment has changed. So when I look at what kids are, and I actually don't like the word kids, even though I use it, because I feel like there's a level of respect that I want to give to the young people. Because I'll be honest with you, the reason why people think I'm so wise or turn to me to advice or whatever is because I've made my share of mistakes, and there are a lot. And going back to this idea of always critiquing what I love, like in order to love myself, I had to really critique myself and look at myself and through that critical lens as well, and try to improve myself try to improve myself as I pick myself apart. Like I'm my toughest critic. And I think that I'm kind of rambling now, but I'll stop there.
One of the titles that we informed the audience early on was of coach. And, I want to get into where your love for the game developed from. I have a lot of stories of Danny as a coach and as a player, but I was showing Jackie earlier before the show a picture of our freshman team, and I can look at the faces of those kids now, and I'm like, wow, those are all really hardened kids, and I know the stories of what they went through, and they're tough, and that's our undefeated team, but Danny's in that team, but we played in 7th grade, 8th grade. But, basketball is a big part of your life, a big part of your story. Where did that start for you?
And wow, going back to the theme of having to be 3 different people, the Lakers were the one thing that kept my family together. It unified us.
Scott hates the Lakers.
My apologies.
Don't worry, I don't hate you yet. Not yet, but
well, the Lakers, my apologies to Scott, was what kept my family together, in the sense of there was such a cultural and generational divide between me and my grandparents, and that divide got wider and wider because they didn't speak English. They didn't really take part in any American, so to speak, type of activities or the American culture, however you want to define that. The only thing they did was cheer the Lakers on. And my grandparents were die-hard Laker fans. And they loved them so much that they hated them too. Why can't this guy do this? And why can't that guy do that?
They had to be perfect,
They
right?
had to be perfect.
Is that how they treated you as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And that was the probably the late 80s. Was that when?
Yes, right. It was the mid to late 80s.
Showtime Lakers
I
era.
remember them being so upset. I can't remember the year, but it was the year that the Lakers were a 1 seed, I think, and they lost to Houston.
Oh, I loved that year.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you did. But that was my first real memory of basketball, how mad my grandparents were and how they forced themselves to watch the Celtics win the title that year.
Oh, yeah.
So that it was almost as if they were playing.
Yeah.
Was that Ralph Sampson, that shot that put them away, right?
Yeah, it was that Ralph Sampson shot. Yeah, that was my first. I don't remember the shot. I would watch it later on, But that year was the first experience that I have like, oh my gosh, like this is real. Like I gotta love this.
Wow. Okay. So I'm just having this realization now. Is that the reason why you were allowed to play basketball? Because that required you to leave the house, right? To go to practice, to spend a lot of time away.
Yeah. For as strict as my family was, the one thing that they really cared about was sports. They wanted their children to be athletes as well. So being a student, being an athlete were the two main things. So if I wanted to go play basketball, my grandpa's like, let him go. Of course he can go.
So that was an escape for you, huh?
That absolutely was. And to, meet a friend who like Russell is one of my first friends in Monterey Park when we moved into that area. To find someone who actually loved the Lakers as much as I did and loved basketball as much as I did that was nice. Yeah.
And that freshman team was not like, just hang out after school. I mean, we were practicing at 5:00 in the morning throughout the season. That was a really intense freshman team.
You had a pretty driven coach.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gerbeck was a good coach.
Yeah.
And that was freshman year. Did you both play through senior?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We played freshman. Actually our high school careers had the same arc, I think.
Yeah.
We played freshmen together. We were promising freshmen. They tried us out at varsity our sophomore years. Our varsity was completely loaded. So there was no real chance for us to play varsity our sophomore and junior years because of how many upperclassmen there were. But they gave us a look, which I'm happy about it. We played partially, and then we played our senior year together at the varsity level.
Yeah, Danny. I'll say Danny is a much better player than I am, and a much better coach as well. But you had, I think, more time dedicated through, right? You spent some time in the Chinese league or basketball organization. How did you get connected with them?
Let's see. It's really interesting. It's actually not even an organization. It was one guy who kind of just ran everything. And that's going to lead us to another conversation later on. But they were trying to recruit just kids to come play. Like a lot of their kids were from Chinatown. And from there, like friends asked friends to play. And one of the upperclassmen, Kenny, asked me like, hey, you want to come down to Chinatown and practice with us a couple times? Like there's this team. And I'm like, sure.
So is this like a traveling team?
Yeah, at the time, this was like the beginnings of AEU basketball. AEU basketball is like this grassroots circuit where now it's become its own little. It's taken a life on its own. It's kind of its own, where college coaches will go to a lot of these AEU events to take a look and see who the upcoming prospects are. It's not even high school ball where they look. But that aside from that, our coach, he saw that there was a need for immigrant Chinese kids to be seen, because we weren't connected. Like my mom didn't know any Japanese organizations like the way Russell, you were part of Mustangs,
Jets.
Right? Or Jets.
Jets and the Mustangs, yeah.
Right. So there were a lot of these like actual formal organizations where kids got to play, and there were a lot of immigrant Chinese kids, immigrant Vietnamese kids, immigrant Asian kids who didn't have this connection. So he kind of formed this team pretty much for that. Later on, we'd find out there were other more sinister intentions for it. But
Do you want to talk about that, Daniel?
Yeah, actually I do now.
So I told Scott before, like we had a conversation about you learning, right? Learning these techniques from to foster real trust, deep trust. And anyway, you can continue.
Yeah. So Coach was like a dad to me, and he was somebody who, because I was raised by a single mom, I never had a strong male figure in my life. Like Russell literally was my strong male figure in my life, and I'm not even joking when I say that. And I think that's why we have this strong bond, because I didn't have that strong male figure in my life who I really trusted, who I can really go to all the time. And comes along and he essentially filled that void for me in high school. And he filled that void for a lot of us, you know, and a lot of what did was he really, what he did was he just provided to us a lot of essential things that we kind of take for granted, like this idea of belonging. He made us feel like we were part of something. He made us feel like he created social supports, where like each person in the team kind of held each other accountable to be at practice, to be at this, to make sure we're all okay. We always showed up to each other's game. We tried to watch each other's games. We tried to go to each other's graduations. We tried to go to each other's events. But he was also really controlling, and I didn't really understand that piece. Controlling to a point where it's like, you got to ask me if you have permission to have a girlfriend, and I'm like, okay, you're not gonna know who my girlfriend is now. Like, so then it was interesting, because then it became my relationship with my mom, where there were things I had to keep from him in order to stay as part of this pack kind of thing. And I think that's the best way to describe it. Like, we were a pack, and we were a really strong, tightly knit pack where we looked out for each other, and it was like this other brotherhood that I would come to understand later on that was grooming us. We would find out later that had allegedly molested former players. And these players were people who ranged in age. I don't want to go into too much detail, because honestly, it's not my story to tell. But let's just say that there were people who, when everything came out in public, there were people within 30 years of age who shared similar experiences. And
what did this do to your trust? I mean, can you trust today?
Right. That's a good question. So I myself, without getting into too much detail, also, I myself am a survivor of childhood molestation. It happened when I was very young, and I would come to learn later that, wow, this happens more frequently than I thought. But going back to that, when this came out and I learned about what he was doing, it really, really it shattered my foundation. I remember feeling really lost for a while. And this was around the same time when I knew I needed to really leave. I thought I needed to leave basketball altogether. I almost wanted to leave teaching altogether, because a lot of what I learned in how to deal with people and how to get the most out of children and help them reach their potential, to pull out whatever, inner potential they had, I learned from. So that made me think, like, wait, is everything meaningful that I ever gone through, is it tainted? Is it tainted because I learned this from this man who I trusted? And in a lot of ways still love. And that's hard for me to say publicly, but that's just what he meant to me at that time. And it wasn't just me, it was a lot of us. So not only did it shake my own personal foundation, it broke up our little pack, or big pack actually, because there were a lot of other generations of packs that he had created, which it broke up a lot of our relationships. So friends who were brothers to me, we started looking at each other like, okay, who's for, who's against, who thinks he did it, who didn't. And and that kind of trickled down to the whole Asian basketball community, which has its own little personality, but it's a big deal in the Asian American world. That had its consequences as well, because now you had people who didn't really know about us, but who respected as a coach, or who respected as this organization. They had to take sides. And I had to learn that it's not about taking sides. I had to learn that this was like, look, this is about what's right or wrong. This is about understanding why these type of things can happen, why abuse happens. And abuse happens because we have a lot of people who create an environment where power can't be questioned. And when power cannot be questioned, when coaches can't be questioned, when teachers can't be questioned, we're in positions of power, and that's huge responsibility. When we put so much trust, blind trust into something, and to a point where you can't question, you can't critique it, that sets groundwork for grooming and abuse to happen.
When you say it's a question of right or wrong, what is the right or wrong? Go back to what you sort of opened the show with, your Japanese experience. Who was right and who was wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that, making me think. Yeah.
And here with was he right or was he wrong? Was he himself a victim? You know, were your teammates who support or don't support him, are they right or are they wrong? You know, it's very, very confusing, isn't it?
Right. Thank you for asking that, because those were questions that I started to having to ask myself. Like, what does it mean? What does right or wrong mean? And this, you know, and that's again part of like leading me down the path of understanding like greater levels of how things work. So, you know, to speculate, right? Any type of abuser, were they abused? Sure. Like where's the root of every, I hate to use the word monster, but what's the root for every monster that we see in society, right? There's always some type of story. Now, that doesn't mean that we're trying to humanize them or we're trying to like absolve them of their actions. But at the same time, like as somebody who's a teacher and a coach and in a position of power, how do I be part of breaking this cycle? Because it really
that's the whole point. Yeah.
So that's the point, right? So what's right or wrong? Individually, my friends, my brothers, we have to reconcile each other from a personal level, and right or wrong becomes gray in that personal level, in that interpersonal level. But when we look at structural, cultural, and societal pieces, systemic pieces that allow the cycle to continue, that's where we can really pinpoint what's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to shift so abruptly the conversation, but I do want to get into some of the stories, right, of your coaching, because that's a big part of who you are. So I've got a ton of stories about Danny. But yeah, he is intense. He's intense. But if I would describe it like this: if you don't know Danny, and you go watch a practice or you go watch a game, you'll think like, okay, that guy's scary, and probably all the kids are scared of him. But I'll tell you a story. Danny's team is up by 25 in the fourth, and they're pressing, and I think he barely called off the press, and his kid's fouling, and he's like, if you guys foul one more time, something's going to happen, right? And I'm refereeing the game, and I had to call the foul. And what happened was they won by 20 something, and after the game, he had all his kids go into the stands and clean up all the trash.
As punishment
for fouling, yeah. or another story was like, it was my first year coaching in high school, and I think a kid had thrown up, and I was like, oh no, and Danny's response was like, all right, come, like clean it up and get back in there. And I was like, oh, do they go home?
Wow.
They just threw up.
Tough love.
I can't say I'm proud of a lot of these stories, but they are true and they do happen.
And I just want to point out that when I said that he is a better player and a coach, like he didn't deny that at all. He didn't even say, oh, no. Yeah.
The player part, maybe.
But we would play, at my house, and I would always have this like ridiculous move where I would throw it like with my right hand over my shoulder, and he would get so mad because I could always get that like just an awkward shot. Like no one shoots a shot like that. But anyway, so we asked each guest to bring an item of significance with them, Danny. And what did you bring with you today?
Oh, it wasn't even hard when. What I actually wanted to bring was the photo of me and you that you gave me.
Oh yeah, that's an amazing
sharpen.
Yeah, that's an amazing photo.
It was a candid shot of us, and we must have been in 8th grade.
8th grade, yeah.
And it's just the way that we looked at each other, but not look at each other. It was weird. Like it was a moment of connection.
Yeah.
Like when I die, my life flashes before my eyes. That picture is going to be one of the scenes that flashes before
I'd
my
like
eyes.
to see that.
Yeah.
Do you have a picture of
I
it?
didn't bring it because it's in my classroom.
Okay.
And I didn't realize it's in my room. I have it hung up on my wall in my class, but I was going to reach for that. The second piece was this thing. So this is, I can't remember exactly which year, but based on the players who were here, this was my third or fourth year coaching. And it was a game where I think we're in LaSalle High School. And I was upset, and back then I was young and I couldn't control my temper, and I broke the clipboard.
You threw it down, broke it.
I don't remember how I broke it, but I would do this a lot with my clipboard.
So for the listening audience, this is a basketball clipboard, like a whiteboard, and it looks like your players' signatures, and they've written something.
They've written on it. They've written notes on it. So there's a crack on it where one of my former players, Danny, he writes on it, proof of intense coaching. But he picked it up. I threw it in after I broke it. I'm like, like one of our rules is like we clean up after ourselves. So I have to model it, right? So I threw it in the trash. And he actually picked it up, glues it together, and at the end of his at the end of the season, he hands it to me. He's like, Coach, this is part of your present. And it had, and not just the kids who were on our team that year, but kids who played for me before also, who signed it, and
So how big of an influence was Bobby Knight on you?
I actually abhorred Bobby Knight. I can't stand him.
Yeah, me neither. In my coaching Instagram,
I understand.
I never put any of his stuff.
Yeah. But Bobby Knight, like I guess I can say I understood his passion. Our values are very different. And I think I've learned a lot over the last, when did I start coaching? 2003. So from 2003 until now, I've learned a lot. So even going back to the throwing up thing, now when kids throw up, I just ask them like, hey, you come back when you feel like you're ready. But if you have to sit out, you need to stay out the rest of the practice, because it would be irresponsible of me as an adult to put you back in if you don't feel like you can continue at one point.
What level do you coach now?
So
at Mark Keppel?
that's a good question. At Keppel, the way we work is everyone coaches everyone. It's like there's no like you coach one level.
There's no
We're responsible
varsity head coach?
Yes, there's a varsity head coach.
Oh, okay.
But we like to see ourselves as like one singular unit who sees, like, we don't see varsity players. We see our players in our program.
And you all practice together.
We try to
maybe separate, but yeah.
We'll practice together as much as we can to cement those values that we want our kids to learn, not just from a basketball sense, but from how to be a human being and part of like society. Like how do you be a good person? That is like our main thing. And so
your coaching is also you're teaching and trying to instill values.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of coaches, I would say Coach Wooden would be my biggest sense of inspiration and motivation, and who, like, his teachings are the ones that inform what I like to teach to my players. I would love to develop his level of poise as a coach, at least public poise. Although I hear stories of Wooden too, and he he was pretty intense and passionate.
Sure.
Behind the scenes, but I would say, the ideas of there's 4 values that I love to instill to my kids. That's worth ethic, humility, integrity, and loyalty. And if you have those 4 things, you have the foundational pieces of what we're looking for as a basketball player and what we're looking for in terms of the type of human beings that we want to go out in the world once they leave our program.
Now with a lot of one and out situations, and maybe not even one and out anymore. There's just so many different ways that young people are, going through college and going into the pros and that sort of thing. Do you think they're all getting that same type of coaching with the same, desire to instill those 4 qualities?
Wow, that's a tough question to be at. That's a tough one to answer. I think it's different, right? It depends. Like a lot of these kids, they come from family homes too. So whatever values that their family instills in them, hopefully like that's what is imbued in them and carries on with them. I would like to think so. I would like to think that every coach is in it for the right reason. Whether I think they're a good coach or a bad coach, whether I agree with Bobby Knight or disagree with Bobby Knight, I like to think that every coach is in it for the right reason, and every coach does. I would like to think that they do try to instill these values to some degree to these kids. But looking at the different levels, like there's an economic factor here that makes that difficult, and that's no individual person's fault, right? That's another going back to the cultural, systemic, structural, and in this case, economic piece. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of different sides to you. The coaching is just one. You're also a teacher, and you're also a husband and a father. I want to get into those, but let's actually. I have one more story before we take a break. So he also threw a clipboard at a game that I was at, and I think I was sitting. I must have been sitting, and it hit me right in the toe. But he was so mad, and so like I didn't want to take away from the intensity of that moment for the team, but it hurt so bad. If you can imagine one of those hitting me right in the
were you reffing or
no? I was I think I was coaching freshmen at the time, and so he was I was sitting at his game on his bench, and hit me right in the toe.
I was just getting you back for that one time you kicked me for kicking your butt in pro wrestling.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of those stories, but we'll come back. We'll take a break and we'll come back.
The legal process can be intimidating. You don't know where to start and you're unsure of what to expect. The attorneys and staff at the law offices of Scott Warmoth have been serving the San Gabriel Valley for over 35 years, helping people just like you navigate through the legal process and ensuring you're treated fairly. You can find them at law888.com or call 626-282-6868. That's 626-282-6868.
All right, we're back with Danny. So before the break, I was mentioning that you have these other roles that you are involved in, husband, father, and teacher. And so can you share with the audience, what you're doing in those roles? What's going on there?
I am the luckiest. You know what? It's everyone's lucky when they have a child, but I feel like the luckiest person alive with the birth of my child, Remy. For the longest time, it's interesting when people asked me when I was younger, like, how do you see your life? I never envisioned myself being a father at all. Never envisioned myself being a father at all, let alone like having a nuclear family. What I've seen is like, I've always seen a single mom. So in a weird way, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll be a single dad and never had been married. How did you get your child? I have no idea. Adopt maybe? That's how I envisioned myself. And when my partner and I decided that, it's time to start a family, I didn't have any resistance to it. I'm like, okay, let's give it. I was evolved enough to a point where it didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. Like, yeah, you know what? Let's go for it. And I didn't know what it meant. Had no idea what it meant at all. When she was born, I'm so speechless right now. I don't even know how to describe it. That's when it really hit me. Like when she was born, when I saw like, oh my goodness, there is a organism that I am responsible for and like I'm part of, and watching her grow every single day has been such a game changer for me. It's really humbled me, and it made me realize I don't know a thing. I know nothing about this world. Like, oh my goodness, seeing the world through a parent's eyes, like completely changed the way I saw things. And if anything, it cemented the values that I held dear. Like even more so, work ethic, humility, integrity, and loyalty became even more important to me. But how I went about trying to live those values out completely changed. It changed the way I ran my classroom. It changed the way I interact with my close friends, family. As a young teacher, I always like, man, these parents, they're nuts. Like, why are they like this? And now it's like, oh yeah, I get it. This is why. I'm never saying a word about that ever again. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to agree with what the parents are trying to do or what their agenda is, but at the same time, I can empathize now, and I can see like, okay, what's the best path to find compromise, or what's the best path to find reconciliation? What's the best path to make this a productive and meaningful and a win-win situation for everybody involved? Now that I do have this perspective of being a father.
How old is your daughter?
She is now 22 months. She's just turned 22 months.
And you find probably, as I did, that every day it just gets better. You know, it's different, you know, but it gets better every day.
You know, I haven't slept in like 4 months because Remy would wake up in the middle of the night and she would want mommy or daddy. And it's like, okay, I'll sleep with her at night. And, you know, you don't sleep, right? She's on you. You don't sleep, but you don't hate a moment of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all those really deeply personal and meaningful moments and things that are in your life, Danny. You know, there's so many more directions that we can go, but I'm interested in this segment of the show. I'm always interested in this segment, but we're going to get to learn a little bit about what you like to do in the San Gabriel Valley.
Danny, this is our SGV3 portion of the show. 3 meaningful places in the San Gabriel Valley to you. Could be places that you like to visit or places you've had some profound experience or memory at. But just, you know, 3 places that mean something to you.
You know, I was telling Russ on the way up here, like this was the hardest thing for me to think about because there's more than 3, right? Wow. So let's start with this one. The first one that came to the top of my head was this restaurant called Minghua. It doesn't exist anymore, sadly. But Minghua's cook used to be they're a noodle house. Minghua is a noodle house, and they make like the most amazing.
And was it right there on Garvey, near where you?
Minghua was on Valley, and right when you pass Atlantic and Valley, across the street from, I want to say, Office Max or Office Depot. It's in this little teeny tiny plaza.
Okay.
But it used to be called Lao Fuzi. No, I'm sorry. Lao Fuzi is a similar type of style noodle house that's across the street from where the Atlantic movie theater is now, on Atlantic and Hellman. That little like plaza place. And that cook, I remember as a 3rd grader going to Lao Fuzi to eat, and we're like, oh my gosh, these were the greatest noodle, aside from my grandmother's, these were the greatest noodles we've ever eaten. Their guoties, which is fried dumplings, were the greatest thing ever. And the cook left. And we're like, where did this cook leave? Like one year, I remember like in 7th grade, the cook left. The cook opened up his own restaurant at Minghua. And I go to, we had to go to all the noodle houses to find which one it was. We're like, this is the one. That's the cook, finally. Minghua closed 2 years ago, I want to say. They retired.
Oh, that's too bad. You find a good noodle place.
They retired, but I wanted to jump over because I basically grew up with them, with this family that was running this restaurant. It's a mom and pop. Operation. So that forced us to find another noodle place, and this one's called Mandarin Deli, next to the 99-cent store on Atlantic, right by Elite Restaurant. And they're a similar operation too. They had this cook. The wife handled everything, was the waiter, cash register, everything. So Mandarin Deli, the last 6-7 years, was our new place ever since Minghua closed. And I like to see them both as the same entity, because they provided the same type of like.
Boy, I just want a bowl of noodles right now.
Go to Mandarin Deli.
Yeah.
What do you get there, Danny?
Let's
see. Their sanxian tao mian, which is like the 3-ingredient noodle. That's what I like. Their broccoli chicken is really good. Mapo tofu is really good. And you can buy like a bag of 50 frozen dumplings for like $20. And during the pandemic, my partner and my wife and I like lived off of those dumplings, and we did our little survival like pandemic buying, disaster buying off there. We loaded up our fridge with dumplings just in case, because we were really afraid of how they were going to survive, and they made it.
They're
still around.
Again, where is Mandarin Deli?
It is on Atlantic. Let's see, the biggest it's like, well, there are no big crossroads in between, but if you go north on Atlantic, passing Garvey, you're gonna pass by LA Fitness, you're gonna pass by NBC Restaurant, you're gonna pass by Elite Restaurant, and it's in the same plaza before you hit a giant church on the right hand side. So don't hit Repetto. So I would say it's between Repetto. It's right dab smack in the middle of El Repetto and Garvey if you're driving north on Atlantic. Mandarin Deli. And when you call them, she answers the phone with 真好吃. 真好吃 means like this tastes really good.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Cool.
that's the name of their restaurant, 真好吃, but in their English nameplate says Mandarin Deli. And there might be like 50 million Mandarin Delis around the area.
Cool.
Oh, what's another?
That's one of them.
Yeah, another
The
place.
Russell, can I tell the story?
What is this?
The barbed wire story. The alley story. That was the second place that stuck to my mind. But I want to say that as just part of the general block.
Okay.
Like there is this area between, let's call it Mark Keppel from Hellman and let's just say Orange, Johan's house, Orange.
Yeah.
From Hellman to Orange, if you shoot down to Garvey and you run all the way down Garvey to Barnes Park and straight down Inez, and you draw a box around there, that general area, like, oh my goodness, everything happened for me and Russell and our little group in that area. There's so many little spots there, so many hidden gems in terms of businesses. But really, it was just the ideal of how we grew up around that area. Like, yeah, I remember everything from getting in these little fights with Russell in that little area, backpacks ending up in someone's backyard, to
playing shooting firecrackers at each other.
Oh yeah.
Like literally holding bottle rockets, lighting them and aiming them and letting them go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. I mean, one went off in my hand at Russell's house.
Wow.
Oh, that's right.
And
yeah.
I remember like, oh my gosh, there goes, like, I still can see. Yes. Is my thumb still there? Yes. It's completely like bruised and
that's scary,
bloody,
huh?
but
Wow.
I remember that. Like, yeah, we did a lot of funny things. It was scary at the time, but funny looking back. Riding our bikes around, like thinking like we were just like, it was almost like Stranger Things. I don't know if y'all watch Stranger Things, but that's the vibe it gave. That's the energy that it gave me when I watched that show. But that was our little safe place.
I have a story. I walked Danny from my house, my door, to the corner, and then he went home carrying my BB gun. And I walked back. I set it down. I went to get more ammo, and I saw someone walking toward my door. So I set the gun down. I went out, and they were like all with their guns drawn on me.
Police?
Yeah, but ununiformed police.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Maybe like 7 or 8 of them. Someone had called and said that there's this kid walking around with this rifle.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did that end up?
Well, then my brother pulls up just at that moment, running to me, thinking like something's going on, and they all point the guns at him.
I remember you telling me about this.
nothing happened though. Like no one got in trouble. They just all left, and that was it. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no. That's a good story to go.
Number three.
Wow. Number three. We might have to like pause for a second
okay.
here because I really got to think about this. Wow. Number three. What would constitute San Gabriel Valley?
We already told the story of the ticket on the show, and I showed you that excerpt of the show. But that's from Danny.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know number three.
Oh,
Okay.
the ticket. Yeah, I remember it was the Lakers or
Clippers
ticket.
Clippers ticket.
Yeah.
Clippers Sixers. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
We can if you want. Yeah.
You know, number three is Russell's house. And it's still Russell's house. I don't care who lives in it. It's still Russell's house. I drive by as Russell's house. And it's Russell's house because that was, it was almost like a gateway for me into like, what it's like to be American. Russell taught me a lot. Like we were going back to like not having a male figure, and Russell really being that male figure for me, even though like we were same age. Actually, you're younger, 1 year. But he was older in so many senses because he taught me so much of what it's. He taught me so many things in terms of like how it's like to live in this country.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was in a bubble. I was in this bubble, living at home with just my family. But with Russell, I was introduced to things like riding your bike to the beach. I was introduced to things like how do you tie a knot. I was introduced things like just like little things like that. Little things like, hey, let's walk to the liquor store. But I had to ask my mom, no, let's just go. Like Duffy's is just like, it's a 10-minute walk.
Duffy's.
Yeah. Or Prano's. Like, let's go to Prano. Let's like what it's like to do those type of things. Like he was a boy. Always wanted to be a Boy Scout, and he was one. And I lived vicariously through him. Like, hey Russell, tell me what you did at Boy Scouts, and he would tell me. And here's a pocket knife like that I was introduced to, and it's like ooh. So I bought a Swiss Army knife. Like I didn't know anything about it, but I wanted to be like Russell. Like I wanted to do everything that Russell wanted to do. So Russell's house, with that basketball court and those 3 wires that you had to shoot over.
Oh yes.
Those 3 wires that you had to shoot over.
So you either had to shoot from the right side or straight on. There was a wire, so you couldn't shoot it under.
Yeah.
But you needed to know the distance, so you could shoot it under if you were like within 5 feet, right?
Yeah. So I developed, you know, a
certain shot.
A certain shot. Like we both did. So Russell's house was it, because that was kind of like home base. That was home. Whenever I walked anywhere, when I got to Russell's house, it's like, okay, if I ever had to bug out somewhere, like that's the place to bug out to. And it's interesting because I don't know if this wants to be public, but it wasn't the safest place for you.
Oh yeah, no. We were talking about that earlier.
But it was for me.
I told Scott that you were the only person who said, and when I was an adult, that you noticed that my whole mood would change when my brother walked in the room. Yeah. And no one had ever said that to me. Yeah. And you told me that not as a teenager, but as an adult.
Yeah. I didn't know what I was seeing as a teenager. As a kid, I didn't know what I was seeing. But looking back, it's like, that's what that was. Because Russell changed when in the presence of his brother and depending on mom's mood and in front of mom. But everyone changes in front of mom. So,
well, I could sit here all day and reminisce and share stories, but unfortunately, we have to sort of close out the show. But I'm really happy that you came, Danny. I've been really looking forward to this, mostly because I get to share this time with you, but that Scott, can learn a little bit more about me through you. So what is on the horizon for you, Danny? What are you working on, and what do you plan, to accomplish in the next, couple of years?
There's two things that really stick out to me. Number one is I want to be the best dad and husband I can be. I see those two things as connected. Nothing against single family homes. That obviously I was raised in one. But for what I can control, like I see the connection between being the best partner I can be and being the best father I can be. So in that, like it's shifting that part, and that it's a monumental task because I've been my own person for so long. Even when I was married, I was my own person in a lot of ways. And now learning to be this unit, this nuclear unit, it's kind of fun and exciting. I'm excited. I'm really excited about this.
And I guess that's the basic building block of a better society, isn't it? You're a science teacher, right? Mm-hmm. You could explain that better than me, but it's like a cell or something.
Absolutely.
You're creating a better, bigger structure.
Absolutely. Thank you for putting it that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The second piece is related to, we alluded to my foundation being shattered with the whole coaching situation. And I thought that I would never play or be involved with basketball ever again when that broke. And it was interesting because even my principal said to me, like, there's a void. And I slowly started returning to basketball, slowly started playing, slowly started going back to Keppel to visit, because the head coach at Keppel, and he's like a big brother to me. And I slowly, he would always invite me to go to the practices or to the games. I would always say no. But slowly going back, and now I'm back coaching again. And I don't see it, I don't know it, but Jen, my wife, has said that you're happier. My principal has said, like, wow, your posture is different at school. Like, people are starting to notice a change. Mm-hmm. And it's helped me bring everything full circle, where even though my foundation was shattered, you can come back to things. You can come back to things. It might take time, but you can come back to things. And now I feel whole again, having basketball as a coach back in my life. So that would be the second piece, is really like from a greater standpoint outside of my own nuclear family, is like, how do I affect my community and be a part of my community through what I love most, which is coaching and playing basketball. So,
well, I told Scott that people who come into your lives are deeply impacted, and I think that maybe he's got a glimpse of that you don't get to know Danny and just be like, oh, there's another guy.
Either love me or hate me.
Yeah. and I'm excited to see again a Danny coached team, and what that progression will look like in your maturity, right? Because now your teams will look different, and I'm sure that they're just going to be even more honed, because of your skill and what you do, what you bring to them. Those kids, I've observed, they love you, and I would describe them as, they would literally run through a wall for Danny. And as an outside observer, you just see this guy yelling and breaking clipboards. But, when you really look down into those teams, they really love you. So, Danny, thank you for being a guest on the show and sharing your story. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. It's very, very inspiring to see,
Scott,
the growth.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you for having this platform for those of us in this little nook.
Yeah.
That sometimes is forgotten and getting us out. Really appreciate the work that you two do.
Thank you. And for the listener, thank you for spending this time with us. I hope you got to know Danny a little bit more, and in some ways know me a little bit more, because this is one of my good friends. And thank you for listening. You can always check out the show on wherever you get your podcasts or sgvmasterkey.com. Leave us a comment and let us know what you think of the show. So thank you.
Thank you to all.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the SGV Master Key. You can find the full back catalog of the SGV Master Key at sgvmasterkey.com and wherever you get your podcasts. This show was produced and edited by Russell Mono and Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. Thanks again for listening or watching. We'll see you again real soon in the next episode.
Nice mother. No, kind mother.